I've been incredibly curious on what is the strongest dragon in this world. So today I'm going to be going through every single dragon in this series and deciding which one will be able to win a battle royale like environment. Because power has some level of subjectivity to it, for example, what would you prioritise? Being able to control and command most dragons, having the most devastating firepower, or being the most speedy and manoeuvrable? There's so many variables at play here. As a result of this, I'm going to be imagining this as a fight to the death, with me trying to figure out which dragons have the highest probability of winning the most matchups. Even though there isn't real maths involved, it's just what I think. It's not a scale of, oh, this species can beat this species, and so on and so forth. It's what dragon species could defeat the most dragon species. If that makes sense? As there are some extremely powerful dragons I do mention later on, but they may have a weakness or a gimmick that a dragon or two may have, which could take them down. But I don't think it's holistically fair to rank them lower because of that, when they could defeat 99% of all the others. I may have over-explained, but I hope you understand what I mean. We'll start with larger groups and we'll be shrinking it down to a few individuals. Starting with the first categories, your standard dragon. Fairly deadly in their own right, and may have a few abilities that can cause incredible harm, but comparing these two later categories, they don't have anything that stands out which give them a significant advantage. This will all become clear later, but for now the dragons in this tier are like the Thornridge, the Thunderclaw, the Snifflehunch, even the Razor Whip and the Sandbuster. Ones like the Sweet Death and the Snap Trapper. The latter two do have luring abilities, however it's implied that it's a pleasant smell that creatures would want to investigate, stimulating their appetite rather than a thing that can take over the mind. So while yes it will give them an advantage, it doesn't have anything that will forcibly stop the dragon in their tracks, which could lead to counterattacks and then being taken down. There are others like the Nightmare, Gronkle, Deadly Nadder and the Zippleback. Bearing in mind we do have to factor in their riders, as these dragons do achieve impressive feats, but for the majority of the time it's from the intelligence of their rider, although it's a bit of a stretch to say that for one. Any dragons I don't specifically mention in this video will be going in this tier. In this category of dragons, I can see in a world them winning a fair few fights, even up against matchups which are unfavourable, but in the grand scheme of things, their probability is a bit lower than what we'll go into. For example, with the next bunch of dragons, who have an ability or two which give them a high chance of winning the fight instantly, however it can be difficult to launch or get into effect. For example, the Triple Strike and the Death Gripper, both having stingers, with one being able to hurt and paralyse, and the other one being able to mind control its victims. If a Death Gripper can manage to hit its target, it will most likely win the fight. However, the accuracy of the stinger seems fairly inconsistent. In the whole film, I don't think we see a Death Gripper managing to hit their target once. Likewise with the Triple Strike in Race to the Edge. Maybe once or twice, but not that often. There's also the Slitherwing, so poisonous that if any dragon gets in contact with it, they'll probably be dead within the next moon. Their skin is coated in poison and they can launch it at their foes. But once again, the episode that they appear in, they don't manage to hit their targets. There's the Silk Spanner with the example of having an incredible firepower. If it manages to hit and ensnare their target, it can completely demobilize a dragon. But again, it comes down to needing to land it, which, especially without the element of surprise, could be easier said than done. There's also the Dramillion, which is a very contextual dragon. If it manages to copy a firepower that's very OP, then this dragon could do very well, but there are significantly more mid to low tier firepowers which they would more likely have. And lastly, there is a Change Ring as well. This dragon is quite interesting as it does have a very overpowered ability, but it never seems to use it, hypnotizing their prey to sleep. Once again, if that's launched, they'll pretty much win the fight, but judging from how little they use it, perhaps it's a very risky venture to do, being timely and leaving the dragon vulnerable. Going slightly further down the list, we're going to be talking about the first couple of individuals, which both have very similar abilities to the previous category, but have that extra advantage. The Flightmare. Its breath is a paralysing mist, so as soon as a dragon is caught within that, it's more than likely not going to have a good time. The paralysing effects seem to last a while, and because the dragon is relatively fast, I think it has a higher chance of it landing its attack, especially coupled with the trailer mist behind it, but at the end of the day, it's still a breath attack and can still be avoided. Next is the Speed Stinger. It's another dragon with a stinger ability, so if it manages to sting their targets, it would again more than likely win the fight. But the reason why I rank them so highly is because evidence shows is that they are very successful with it, being extremely fast and consistently hitting the enemy dragon. I genuinely think this dragon could have been one of the most successful ones, however its flaws really bring it down, as it's the fact that it cannot fly. So as soon as the dragon is spotted, the enemy dragon just need to fly up. Another weakness is, if the dragon is significantly larger, it would take more stings for the venom to fully take effect. And this applies to all the other abilities mentioned prior. They'll be needing more paralyzing mist, more silk span, more fire to take them down. That's kind of the main reason why I rank bigger dragons higher on this list. Like the next one we're going to talk about, the Submaripper. Perhaps even the Fathom Film could be here, but this one's a bit more interesting to talk about, because if it's a fight within the ocean, this dragon would more than likely win, especially with its firepower, creating whirlpool that can suck in dragons from the sky. But if this dragon was on land, I don't know if its firepower would help it. It would kind of be just a sitting duck. So whilst yes, it could resist a lot of attacks just from its sheer size, eventually it would fall, and especially from the dragons who I think would consistently take it down. The highly predatory dragons. Another name for this category is the Fury Likes. So yeah, I'm putting the Night Fury in this part of the list, which I can see as quite a controversial decision, but please hear me out. Out of all the dragons on this list, the Night Furies have had the most matchups with other dragons. So we could get a relatively good gauge on how well the Night Fury fares against other species. And all the dragons I listed previously, Toothless has seemed to either outmaneuver, outwit them, or even straight up outfire them, clearly showing their skills are very good. However, there are a few times in the show where the Night Fury has been evenly matched, like with the Skrill and the Snow Wraiths, both having relatively equal firepower and speed. There are other Fury likes in the games which rival the stats of the Night Fury, and there is of course the Light Fury, which is the same species. People often get confused in what subspecies actually means. It does mean they are the same species, but different enough to warrant a subdivision within that category. Think of it like the tigers. These are all the same species, but there are many subspecies. So my point being, with the Night Fury and the Light Fury being the same species, they of course have the same stats, power and maneuverability and everything else. But by now you may be thinking I'm off my rocker. Toothless is a very powerful dragon. He defeated the Red Death and the Bewilderbeast. Well, we can't ignore the major factor of Hiccup. This is where we can't fully rely on Toothless's achievements is. I'll be honest with you, I'm not too sure if the Night Fury would be able to defeat a Red Death. Hiccup's the one who came up with the plans to tear its wings and ignite the gas in its mouth. Before this, Toothless never really resisted the Alpha command. We could see this a couple of times in the movie. Likewise with the Bewilderbeast. Twice Toothless fell for the mind controlling. Without Hiccup, he wouldn't have snapped out of it and continually resist it in the fight. Even with the Screaming Death, it was Hiccup's specific plan to lure it and smash it into many pillars to wear it down. I know Night Furies are intelligent, but are they really that intelligent? Although I do have to ponder over the existence of the Alpha mode, because everything I argue could go out the window, and unfortunately is too vague in the films to really put down as concrete evidence. Like, is it only triggered from a strong friendship? Does every dragon have this ability, or is it just the Night Furies? I'm going to have to go by what we see in the films. Volker specifically stated that Toothless is challenging the Alpha to protect Hiccup, so I'm presuming this is triggered through very specific means, which not every Night Fury is capable of. And because this is matchups between dragon species and not individuals with their riders, and Toothless was still subservient to the couple of alphas prior to him, additionally they could still fall victim to very common dragon traps, I'm going to have to put this species here. So from one group to another couple of individuals, first of which is the Sentinels. This dragon by design is supposed to counter pretty much every dragon they encounter, because they either need to protect their island or prevent dragons from leaving. So this is why I rank them so highly. However, they do have a couple of glaring issues which we need to talk about. They tend to need a second time round to properly defeat a dragon, so these matchups heavily depend upon if the Sentinels have seen their enemy species before. So extremely rare dragons, or ones of brink of extinction, like the Night Fury, they may have a difficult time with, which we see in the show with Toothless and Hiccup escaping the island. But upon their return, it took them to gain their trust and respect so they can leave again. Some other possible shortcomings, they are medium sized, and could be entrapped and stuff as a result. We're not too sure if they are susceptible to venom, or at least block the penetrative attack because of their stone-like scales. They are blind, which does remove one sense but enhances all the others, so perhaps a dragon being snuck up on is more difficult, even though they do just lie there motionless. And it especially doesn't help them against the next dragon on this, the Death Song / Slither Song. This is an instance of two dragon species being so similar that we might as well just talk about the one, but it still counts on the list. But out of all this normal tier of dragons, these species I believe are the most powerful because they have two abilities which combine together phenomenally. The first being the Siren Call, luring in any dragon from miles away, putting the opposing dragon in a vulnerable position. for it to then be ambushed with the ambush shot. Despite me saying that breath attacks can be a little bit inconsistent, this one is so fast acting, with just one shot, it can pretty much put any dragon out of commission. This dragon does have a couple of weaknesses, like if they are hard of hearing, they won't hear the siren call, if they have a coating that protects them against the amber shot, or if the dragon just generally outsmarts them. This aspect is the most debatable, as we have seen Toothless escaping once, but because it happened off screen, we don't know whether or not if it was just genuine skill or luck. But the thing about this dragon that just tips it over the edge, that makes them slightly more powerful than the Fury likes, is that they can kind of cover their own weaknesses, being innately fast and powerful within themselves. Tussling with a thunder drum, known for their raw strength, managing to catch Toothless a couple of times, and the general intelligence that they present. For example, Garth sealing himself within the cocoon to protect him against the other Slitherwings. I haven't even mentioned the application of the amber shot removed from its intended use, as it could be quite a useful firepower. But as this video is long enough, I'm gonna have to leave it there. But this is where we step it up a notch. These aren't normal dragons anymore. These dragons are inherently larger and have an innate ability to command all the dragons we have talked about thus far. So at this point, if we want to find out who is the most powerful dragon, we'll need to pin these against each other. Yes, it's the alphas. Although before we talk about their size, strengths and abilities, we need to clear up a bit of an asterisk in the dragon commanding area. Every dragon in this tier has had evidence of this ability, apart from one, but I'll explain that later. But for now, the majority of this stems from the Rise of Berk games. There are 11 legendary dragons, with some having collections where you can get their minions, thus meaning these dragons have followers and a command over them. Although this doesn't count for every single dragon on this list, which we can quickly strike off now. The first one is the Submaripper. In the collections you just collect more Submarippers, and there are regular versions of them, so this could just be a alpha of the pack type situation. All the Submarippers in the collection don't say anything about loyalties towards the quote-unquote alpha Submaripper. Additionally, there's the Crimson Gorgasa, which doesn't have a collection, and in the Titan Uprising games they are not seen as alpha dragons. There is the Elder Sentinel, but once again all the Sentinels that you can get in their collection don't mention any loyalties to this dragon, and again they are seen as non-alpha types in any other games than the show. There is the Fault Ripper, but that kind of suggests we need to include the Sky Torturer and Jormungandr, all three of which were defeated by very common dragons, so one of them can't even bloody fly and struggle against terrible terrors. Not naming any names! So with that, we have these 8 dragons that we can talk about, as they all have dragon minions who follow them. Which leads us needing to explain the logistics of this. Just judging by the behaviour dragons, they seem to naturally respond to whoever's in charge. I imagine they do this as self-preservation to cause least conflict, or perhaps there's something within their dragon culture. This thing is kinda subtly implied. But when push comes to shove, the dragon can ignore their leader, especially as some descriptions say that the dragon specifically chooses to join the alpha. This is shown in the first movie, as Toothless was able to fight against the Red Death. It would have commanded Toothless back if it wasn't so. But with that in mind, I do believe all these dragons, because of their inherent size and external abilities, would outclass all the other previous dragons in terms of strength, power, and winning statistically. But there's no maths. Look, it just required one chomp to get rid of that Gronkle, okay? So, after that long-winded explanation, these are the final contenders. The top 8 most powerful dragons. In the red corner, we have all the Death Dragons. The Red Death, the Green Death, the Purple Death, and the Streaming Death. In the blue corner, we have the other alphas. The Forever Wing, Shellfire, Luminous Crayfin, and Bewilderbeast. Who will win? Or who will die first? It's the Luminous Crayfin. Yeah. Despite once being at the Leviathan class, the shell is like an island. So while yes, evolutionarily speaking, a shell is quite overpowered, especially when it comes to defense, unfortunately every single one of these alpha species dragons have a way to destroy an entire island. And the Luminous Crayfin doesn't have much to counter either. Its firepower is just an oil ball of fire, and all of its luminous abilities I doubt was going to do much. It could throw off a couple of flashbangs and be incredibly annoying in the battle. These seem like a peaceful giant, and this is under the assumption that they can command other dragons, which we don't know. I'm only saying that because I've been a little bit liberal with it. I had a feeling it was going to be planned, but because School of Dragons never finished, yeah. And also the assumption of it can even tuck into its shell, which we don't even know it can do, because if it can't, then it has some very vulnerable spots which the other dragons can exploit. So, despite me actually quite liking the Luminous Grayfin, I can't rank it any higher than this. Next is the smallest out the alphas, the Screaming Death. We've seen from birth them having an actual command over the other Whispering Deaths, apart from its own mother. And it has a set of exile dragons which follow it. The Gronkle, the Hideous Zephyrbak, and the Monstrous Nightmare were all displaced via the Screaming Death. These two decided to join it willingly, whilst I guess the Monstrous Nightmare was commanded there, as well as Undersnuff, the Terrible Terror. The Exile Stormcutter has dual loyalties, and the Winged Gnasher called Aurora has nothing to do with it. It migrates its own set of dragons. An alpha species here. So this dragon doesn't seem to have a tight grip on its own control, and furthermore, being one of the smallest alpha dragons, it seems to have a bit less power. Whilst it's described its scales being some of the most toughest, the only thing that can penetrate it is the boiling water from the Scauldron, but I'm not entirely convinced it can resist a bite force from a giant behemoth. It does have a screeching ability which can disorientate a lot of dragons, and a barrage of fireballs it can launch, so whilst yes it's strong and has a power to destroy an island, pitting this up against some of the other alphas, I don't think would last too long. It could put up a good fight though. Next we move on to the second smallest alpha, the Shellfire. Despite being able to get 6 dragons from its collections, only 3 of them were actually loyal to the Shellfire, with that being the Rumblehorn, the Sentinel, and the Scauldron. Although the Rumblehorn now resides in Berg because the Shellfire was defeated and Risk the Edge. So it proves its alpha status, but the dragon being the size it still struggles to contend with other dragons of a similar size, like the Sun Ripper. They are natural born enemies, with the Race to the Edge one even defeating it. But let's focus on some positives, the reason why I think it would get even this far. The armor plating on its body is a very impressive defensive tool, described being able to shrug off any attacks. Coupled with the protruding horns on its face, it could deal some significant damage back, and its firepower is nothing to scoff at either. Giant plasma balls that could be fired from miles away, destroying entire islands. And because it mainly resides in the ocean, most dragons will struggle to get to it, even some of the other alphas it's fighting. But despite all this, I think in these cases, size does matter, as it equals more power. And the dragon isn't quite big enough to resist dragons that are similar size, or potentially bigger ones, which we can talk about now. And these set of 3 dragons are so equal to each other, I don't think I can order them in a ranking, so these 3 take the 3rd place equally, and that's the Green Death, the Red Death, and the Forever Wing. The Green Death and the Red Death are pretty much the same dragon. They are technically different species, so I have to count them as 2 different things, but they are identical in terms of abilities, strength, and sizes. And I have to say the same for the Forever Wing. Once again, similar to size and relative toughness, and although their firepowers are different, but they kind of have the same level of destruction. The Green and Red Death erupts a massive barrage of fire, whilst the Forever Wing spews lots of lava. The Green and Red Death have a massive mace tail and nasal horn with a very strong bite force. The Forever Wing has a tough wood-like skin to it, covered in foliage, and perhaps with the ability to control some of that. It does also have a sedative effect, but the dragon needs to bathe into it, and it takes time. Also, I don't think the Forever Wing will be able to produce enough to sedate a massive dragon like the Red or Green Death. We can confirm that the Forever Wing does have an alpha command over a set of dragons. All of them bar one has been described to be a part of the Forever Wing pack, with a few of them stating the specific stuff they do within it, like sensing danger or hunting for prey. Exactly what we see with the Red Death in the first movie. Likewise with the Green Death, all of them but 2 specifically state they are working for that dragon and fulfill different roles within its pack. I even like the small detail with the Brute Buffalord. That dragon can't control its firepower, but the Green Death does not care about being fired on. Oh, I should also state, with the dragons that don't specifically mention they have allegiances to the alpha dragons, I do think they are still a part of their pack, otherwise they wouldn't be part of the collection. But I'm going to acknowledge what's specifically evidenced, rather than what's implied, as that can be left up to interpretation. Additionally, both the Red Death, Green Death, and the Forever Wing can destroy an island. The bunch we saw in the comics, they didn't leave that island too pretty looking, did they? We've seen a Red Death just collide through a mountain, kind of made out of an island. So yeah, all in all, they're about equal. Which nicely leads us to the last 2 dragons, the gigantic Purple Death or the King of Dragons Bewilderbeast. And out of these 2 dragons, who do I think will win? Drumroll please! The Bewilderbeast. Yeah, sorry to be boring, but it just makes sense. Whilst yes, the Purple Death is very impressive in its own right, being the largest dragon to ever exist, it towers above Berk, its sheer size could create earthquakes and whirlpools, and has an eruptive firepower, at this scale, could probably scorch an entire island in one go. Out of these 6 dragons that you can get in the Purple Death collection, 4 of them are loyal to the Purple Death. And I can see why. I would be too. The only way the Purple Death was defeated wasn't through sheer force, but through a relatively gimmicky way. It's the hypnotic powers of the Changeling. Yeah, this is why I had so many disclaimers that even some of the common dragons could do impressive feats. But the dragon only just fell back to sleep, so it could reawaken and cause absolute carnage again.
But this is the reason why I'm giving the Bewilderbeast the edge, because it has actual mind control.
So any dragons with weird gimmicks would not affect it. You have to defeat this with sheer force.
This dragon was the original wielder of the King of Dragons command, which is like the CEO level of dragon commands. It can still be ignored, bad advice, but it can, because we see other alphas respond to it. We see the Screaming Deathling race to the edge. Toothless uses it against a bunch of Forever Wings. Even Drago's Bewilderbeast responds to it in the Hidden World. But this is implied as an individualistic thing. Only one dragon at a time could have this, and it can be transferred between species. So whether or not this is innate within the Bewilderbeast, it's hard to say. For now, I'm going to say no, but this doesn't detract it from this position.
The dragon is nothing to scoff at either. It has 2 giant tusks, so it could contend with anything that's similar size to it. And it has a very versatile firepower. Being frozen water, it could either build its own fortress, which is incredibly defensive, or launch an opponent with a barrage of ice, encasing the dragon like a death song would, or just straight up murking it. Ah! Credit where credit is due, the Death Song Amber is slightly more difficult to get out of. The King of Dragons has his name for a reason. The Bewilderbeasts are truly the most powerful dragons in How to Train Your Dragon. And 2 Toothless come along and absolutely demolished it.